Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. This is William Bell, and with me is Dr. Don Preston. Don, how are you doing today? I know you've got some exciting information for us, as always. So what's happening besides the hot weather you shipped in here from Oklahoma?
Well, I tell you what, again, today was one of those absolutely gorgeous days that comes along. Here it is March, and it was a little tiny bit windy, but nothing major at all. And it just, oh boy, just absolutely beautiful, beautiful sunshiny weather. And, things are just cracking right along. I want to announce, for those who have asked, I want to announce 2 different things, and that is our Preterist Pilgrim Weekend for this year will once again be a virtual Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. We will not have it on site. Hopefully, Lord willing, we can get back to our on-site conferences next year. We're certainly hopeful of that. We have a great lineup of speakers, and I'm hoping that a certain guy who said he couldn't be there will change his mind. So we're hopeful of that. But nonetheless, our theme this year is the book of Revelation as the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel, which, of course, led to the calling of the nations. And that is July the 17th through the 19th. We will have the same basic format that we had last year. And we have some brand new speakers that we've never had in the past, at least one new. Actually, we have 2 brand new speakers that we've never had in the past. We've got my good friend Al Pershone from Australia. William knows him well. He's an absolutely great guy, very well-read guy. And then we have another guy. His name is Rick Calvert. Rick is a very well-read guy, and very, very thrilled to have him on our conference this year. So that's a little bit of a rundown on that. And then I'm extremely thrilled to announce that my book, Circumcision in the New Creation, is nearing completion. And Lord willing, by the end of this month, I will have it to the publisher, and it will be in his hands. So I really am pleased to announce both of that. Now, I don't know if you had some other news in mind, William. There's an awful lot of really good stuff going on. So what did you have in mind that I needed to announce?
Well, I don't have any particular news, with the exception of what I would call pretty exciting news in terms of the expansion of the Now Network broadcast.
My goodness.
And that was pretty exciting, and I received a lot of feedback from that when I posted it to Facebook, and still am getting feedback from it. But basically what it says is the Now Network Television is pleased to announce the expansion of our TV channel to an additional 180 million homes in sub-Saharan Africa and Western Europe on Intelsat 20 satellite TV. And they, of course, give the location of that. But this is posted on the Facebook page. It says, we will now broadcast our TV channel to over 236 million homes in the United States, 56 million on U.S. cable TV, Sub-Saharan Africa and Western Europe, 180 million on Intelsat 20 satellite TV. So that is pretty exciting, and they list all of the countries. I won't go through all of them. A few of them I can't even pronounce, but
yeah,
it's just about the entire continent of Africa, really, and
yes,
a few other countries in Europe, and that's really exciting. So as you know, Don has his morning music program on, and you're on on Thursdays or Fridays?
I'm on Friday mornings, 9:30 Central Time, which of course is 10:30 Eastern Time. And I would like to throw this note in there. Ever since we started showing my Now TV on YouTube instead of simply Now TV, but we started showing my videos, that viewership has continued to grow. 2 or 3 weeks ago, one of my programs, and again, keep in mind, this is strictly on YouTube where we are showing them. It doesn't count all of these countries and all of these stations that are on the Now TV network. This is totally separate and distinct. And pardon me, one of my videos, the last I looked, had reached well over 1,100 views. Now that's not pardon me, that's not going viral. I understand that. But nonetheless, those are independent viewers. That is to say, independent from Now TV. And so that's just another outreach is what that is. And the comments that I've started getting just on YouTube as a result of my Now TV videos is very, very gratifying. And William, you are on Saturday afternoons, correct? 7 or 8? What time is it?
It's at 6:30 till 7 Central Time, 7:30 to 8 Eastern Time, and that's every Saturday evening. And I haven't begun putting those on YouTube yet. I have used some of the audios to post them on Spreaker, and I think they get posted on a couple of other places, so I've just been extracting the audio from them. And but in addition to that, of course, we have another radio broadcast, which we do locally, but it also expands around the world because it's live streamed on Facebook. And that one we have begun uploading to YouTube. Well, we resumed our uploading them to YouTube, and they've been getting very good responses as well. So I'm really excited about what's going on, about the reach that's out there. And as you said earlier, and as we mentioned, the interest in that, I've had people ask me, how do I get to the channel? How do I watch it, et cetera? And others just excited because now they're able to get that. Solomon Ghana was one of the countries. So there's Solomon and Raymond and a few others there who are excited about it. And that just means that, the reach for Covenant Eschatology has expanded significantly. And they've got, 2 shows at least right now to listen to and to study from. And so, man, that is just really, really awesome. It didn't make our, detractors and enemies feel, too good about it. They had a few snide remarks to make over the fact that, this good news has taken place. And it just shows, how, providence works and the Lord works when people, are, seeking to snuff out the message and shut it down. And yet, doors continue to open. And so we're very, very grateful for that.
Oh, amen to that. I just, I read a lot of those comments after you posted that. And it was so thrilling to see the incredibly positive comments that were coming from different people from literally around the world who were thrilled that Now TV was expanding, and some of them it was going to be expanding into their region, into into their country and what have you, where they'd be able to have access to it. So, yeah, I mean, this is absolutely incredible. And it gets back to that, which we have discussed on this program before, about how in the many days ago, in the long, long ago, at Warren, Ohio, we would sit around after the lectureships. We'd sit around, we'd talk, we'd plan, we would scheme, and we would think that, well, what's it going to be like in the future? One of these days, there's going to be more seminars for covenant eschatology around the world. And because at the time there was one. And then all of a sudden you just start seeing seminars popping up everywhere. And, you know, the joking was even going on. Well, one of these days, somebody besides Max King will write some books. Well, this guy named Don Preston comes along, and so far he's written 34 books, or 33, or whatever it is. And we used to say, just think about it. One of these days, we are going to have preterists on radio. Well, I can't even begin to tell you how many preterist radio programs there are around the country and around the world right now. And we would speculate and we would dream, one of these days there's going to be preterist TV. And now we have preterist programming going into hundreds of millions of homes. Folks, just think about that. I mean, that truly is one of those, you have to catch the power of that, realities. This has never, ever been done before. And it's so absolutely thrilling to be a part of it. You know, I have to say this. On one of my Now TV programs not long ago, I made the comment that sometimes in television, you don't really know who is watching, where people are watching from, or even if they're watching, because there is no interaction. Generally speaking, on a television program, there's not a comment section. There's just, you know, you do your thing, you sign off, so to speak, and you show up again next week. And so I made the comment somewhat facetiously. I said, hello, anybody out there? And it was thrilling to begin to get some emails that said, hey, yeah, we're out here. We're watching you. We love your program. You know, whatever you do, do not stop, and that type of thing. So that was humorous to me that I said that somewhat facetiously, and yet people responded to that, just, you know, affirming, hey, we're here, we're watching. You keep teaching, we will keep learning. And so, like I said, it was just really, really cool. So, again, as we have said on so many occasions on this program, when we have shared some of the things that are going on in the preterist movement, and look, I was told just this last week of someone that's kind of discouraged. I don't know that discouraged is the right word for it, but kind of pondering, okay, where are we at in the preterist movement? Well, we're not the ones to determine that in a definitive, objective, fully measurable sense. Now, we can report, just like William just did, that covenant eschatology is now going into 150 million new homes, or however many million it really was. So that's pretty objective, and that's pretty substantive. That doesn't tell us how many hearts, how many minds are actually being changed. That very often comes much later. Our task, our responsibility is to sow the seed and to let God give the increase. just like the Lord promised in Isaiah chapter 55. My word will not return to me void. It will accomplish that to which I send it. That's an incredible promise. It is a promise concerning providence. That is one of the great mysteries of the Bible, a mystery that is so incredible that I freely confess I do not understand it. I have told probably thousands of people, I do not understand providence. I believe in it. I preach it. I trust in it. I just simply don't understand it. And so, as we continue to sow the seed, you know, it's kind of like this program, Two Guys in a Bible, all right? We don't hear from tons of people. We do certainly hear from people, but this program is archived. If the archives don't go away, all right, people 10 or 15, maybe 20 years from now will be able to click and to listen to William Bell and Don Preston share the marvelous truth of God's Word in regard to His faithfulness. And that is such a liberating, such an invigorating reality. And it literally staggers the imagination to realize that futurists are trying to defend their view of a failed Messiah. Now, I know that if there are any futurists listening, you may be going, what in the world are you talking about? Well, here's what I mean. On my Now TV, for well over a year now, in August it'll be 2 years, I have been examining what I call the challenge of Christ. And what I call the challenge of Christ is this. Jesus said in John 10:37 and following, if I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. Do not believe me for my words' sake. Believe me for my works. Now, I think all of us can understand that challenge. Jesus was saying, hey, if I don't keep my promises, don't believe in me. And we can put that right down to the brass tacks where the rubber meets the road level, saying, Jesus said he was going to go to Jerusalem, be crucified, buried, and he was going to raise himself again from the dead the third day. Bottom line, the challenge of Christ is this. Paul stated it succinctly. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 12 to 17. If the dead ones are not raised, then Christ is not raised. Your faith is in vain. I got to tell you, folks, as a little bit of a digression, former preterist Sam Frost, who wrote a really excellent book on the resurrection some years ago, when he abandoned the truth of covenant eschatology, he gave me the full ownership and distribution copyright of the book. So I have printed the book. I continue to print the book. I continue to sell the book. And that book, I can tell you, has had a profound influence on the lives of many, many people. They have become convinced of the truth of covenant eschatology. Well, so many people have found that book convincing, and since I continue to publish the book and sell the book, Sam Frost has felt it necessary to write a response to his own book, to refute his own book. Now just think about that a little bit, okay? And on his own, which is entitled Vigilate et Orate, he just published, like 3 days ago, in an article entitled Sam Frost versus Sam Preston. Now, he's obviously being sarcastic with the title, and that he is a chief of sarcasm these days. But here's the point that I'm getting at. When Sam Frost was a preterist, his thinking was logical, lucid, powerful, effective, spot on. He did a fantastic job of exegesis. As I read this article now, in his attempt to refute his own book, and before we came on the air, I was sharing with William some of the things that he wrote. And I got to tell you what, folks, it's the biggest mess, please excuse me for being so blunt, but the biggest mess of verbal gymnastics, of theological gymnastics, of denying the overt teaching of Scripture that you will ever find. And here's the irony of this. Okay. Sam Frost said that William and I, and full preterists, we reject 2,000 years of church commentary. And yet there are two tenets, and I haven't even finished reading the article yet, but there are two tenets, two aspects of this article in which Sam Frost categorically 100% rejects and contradicts 2,000 years of biblical interpretation by the historic church. But he says, we're the ones that reject church history. Well, we do reject a lot of it. But he says he stands with church historians. He says he stands with the united testimony of the church. Well, that's a flat-out falsehood. Because like I said, in this article, he tells two blatant misrepresentations of church history. And that's what happens when people abandon the truth of covenant eschatology. Well, I'll leave it at that. But getting back to the point of how things are changing and how covenant eschatology is growing, and this point that I was making is very, very important. The challenge of Christ is, if Jesus didn't do what he said he was going to do, and he said he was going to be raised from the dead, then he is not the Christ. That's what Paul said. If Christ is not risen, your faith is in vain. Okay. But that's not all that he said he was going to do. He said he was going to come in the glory of the Father with his angels in the judgment of all men in the lifetime of the first century generation. Now look, folks, he either did that or he didn't. And on Facebook, I have been lately countering, arguing with people who call themselves Christians. They call those of us who affirm that Jesus kept his word. Now think about that. Okay. Just think about that. Those of us who affirm that Jesus kept his word, we are called false teachers and heretics. But those who teach, and who affirm that Jesus did not come back with the angels in the judgment of every man in that generation, they are supposedly the defenders of truth. When I have issued that challenge of Christ, and I have said to them, I have challenged them and said, you are serving what you claim is a liar. Here's what Jesus said. Now, did he lie or did he fail? And you know, William, I've been posting that challenge now. I've been on the Now TV for, again, it'll be 2 years in August. I have not had one person come back and say, well, no, he didn't lie, but. And I've not had one of these protagonists on Facebook say, no, he didn't lie. Because they know if they say he didn't lie, guess what? They're preterists. But, of course, they don't want to go on record saying, well, yes, he did lie. They don't want to go on record saying, well, he didn't lie, but he failed. Or they don't want to go on record saying, well, he didn't lie and he didn't fail, but he just put it off for a while. Now, keep in mind, folks, these are people who claim to be Christians. Some of them are preachers. And yet they deny that Jesus kept his word. The beauty of covenant eschatology and the irony of covenant eschatology is that those of us, as I mentioned a moment ago, those of us who say that Jesus kept his word, we are called false teachers and heretics. The people who say he did not keep his word are called the defenders of the faith. Now, if that's not irony, I don't know what it is. William, you and I have talked about this before. How does this not register with people and make them look themselves in the mirror and go, whoa, wait a minute, I got to put a stop to this?
Well, I don't know how they face themselves, looking at it from the perspective that they do. The clarity of what the Lord stated in John 10, as you say, was, extremely powerful. He placed that question to the Jews in the audience, and of course, they didn't bring any charge against him. They couldn't deny what he was doing. It was very much, very visible and powerful in their midst. And in the same way, his teaching is that way. His teaching cannot be refuted. And that's why, when you present the challenge as you've done, nobody's responding to it. And to respond in the way that they do is really just, it's just beyond reason to see that happen, but yet it happens all the time. And they take up the very, infidel statements, if you please, and advocate them in order to deny, the plain words of Christ, and words that they just cannot, cannot get around any way that they try. And yet they will be content to make the same claims that those who rejected him make, and continue on as though what they're doing is acceptable. It's just unreal.
Yeah, it really is unreal. I mean, and again, as I have challenged these Christians on Facebook and said, how do you defend your view? Your view says he lied. Your view says he failed. Your view says he was deluded. Now, which one of those positions is correct? Total silence. Absolute, total silence. Or they'll jump off to a brand new subject.
In a hurry.
And, in a hurry. I call them yabits. What they do is they go, yeah, Preston, but look over here. Hey, everybody, don't pay attention to what Preston's saying. Look at this other subject. And so they become yabits. Yeah, but. And that exposes their inability and their knowing, their cognizant knowing that they cannot answer the challenge of Christ. I mean, it's just, it's really sad above everything that, to go back to that statement that I made a moment ago, how sad and how ironic is it that the only people in the world who affirm the faithfulness of Christ, that he kept his word, are the ones that are called the heretics. How ironic and sad is that? So, anyway, that's kind of where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we want to thank you for joining us right here on Two Guys in a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And let's get back to Ezekiel chapter 47. We talked last week that Ezekiel 47 is in some ways, many ways I would suggest, the pinnacle, the denouement, to use that word, of this entire discourse on the temple. Now, it's really interesting to me that in chapter 47:1, we have John leaving that temple. Not John, excuse me, Ezekiel. I've got Revelation on the mind. And so he sees this river flowing out from the door of the temple, flowing out from the threshold of the temple. Now, as we pointed out last week, John in Revelation draws extensively from Ezekiel 47. And we've talked before, we've talked repeatedly about the difficulty of being able to determine whether Ezekiel 40 to 48 is messianic or whether it is historical. There is certainly, it seems to me, at this point, an admixture of historical and messianic. And I say that because, as I mentioned a moment ago, the book of Revelation is, it draws extensively on the book of Ezekiel chapter 47 because it tells us about this river of life. And oh, by the way, Zechariah chapter 14 likewise draws on the imagery of Ezekiel 47 in the vision of the last days, the establishment of the kingdom, the destruction of Jerusalem and the establishment of the kingdom, and the establishment of the Messiah as one Lord in a day known only to the Lord, 36, or I should say vice versa. And in that day, a clear river of life would flow out from under the throne, and it would give life to wherever it flowed. Well, again, that's taken directly from Ezekiel, Ezekiel chapter 47. And we read last week about some of these measurements, and like I told you, I get lost in the math and what have you. But here's the point. When Ezekiel saw that river begin to flow, as he says, it was ankle deep. Well, that's not much of a river. And then he went another 1,000 cubits out from the threshold of the temple. Well, the water came up to his knees. As he continued another 1,000 cubits out, the water came up to his waist. And it just kept getting deeper and deeper and wider and wider. And I'll begin reading here with verse 8. He said to me, "Son of man, have you seen this? It became a river that was so large it could not be crossed." That's verse 5. And Ezekiel said, "It became so large I could not cross it, for the water was too deep, water in which one must swim to a river that could not be crossed." And he said to me, "Son of man, have you seen this?" Then he brought me and returned me to the bank of the river. When I returned there, along the bank of the river were very many trees on one side and the other. Then he said to me, "This water flows toward the eastern region. It goes down into the valley and enters the sea. When it reaches the sea, its waters are healed." William, what sea is that talking about east of Jerusalem?
That would be the Mediterranean Sea.
Maybe, it's a different.
No. If it's east of Jerusalem, then that would be the only thing I can think of. If it's east of Jerusalem, it's going to be either the Jordan River or the Dead Sea, and it's more than likely the Dead Sea.
Yeah, it's the Dead Sea because, pardon me, when this river flows into this sea, its waters are healed. Well, that can't be the Jordan because the Jordan has always been a river full of fish. It can't be the Mediterranean because the Mediterranean has always been known to be a sea that is rich and abundant in life. The Sea of Gadarenes.
And it's on the other east side.
Exactly. That's exactly right. It's actually west of Jerusalem in the temple. So, I'm bad on geography too. So this reference here, and basically everyone understands it, is that this river flowing from the temple. Now, what's interesting to me is it says it would flow east, and yet technically, geographically, accurately, the Dead Sea is south and east of Jerusalem. So it's not striving to give an absolute, minutely accurate statement when it says east. Well, is it east? Yes, but it's probably more south than it is east. But because it's east, and I think we have to take into consideration also that emphasis has been given that this temple faces east. The doors face east. The river flows east. William, what are your thoughts on this emphasis on the east?
Well, I don't know if I have very many, other than, the temple, as always, it faced to the east. There's of course, the sun rising from that perspective. I can't think at the moment what that significance would be.
Okay. Pardon me. I have looked at that and I pondered that, and for the longest time, and I'm being a little bit like you, but it appears to me, and I could be wrong, but at this point in my studies, and this would be on my AT&T position, my at this time position, but I believe that the significance of this emphasis on the east is what you just barely hinted at there, and that is the sun rises from the east. The sun was the source of all life, and so to face the east was in fact to face the source of light and life, and to flow toward the east was the same thing. It flows in the direction of life and light. That to me is about the nearest that I have been able to come up with. I'm absolutely positive that there is a symbolism that is being attached there, that is being hinted at. Now,
and that would kind of fall in line with Malachi 4.
Yes,
the Son of Righteousness, and so the temple from that perspective would be facing, the Son of God, the Son of Righteousness.
Yes, and it should be noted, I suppose, that in ancient rabbinic thought, it was believed that Messiah, when he would come in judgment and when he would come in the kingdom, would come from the east. And that's one of the reasons why the temple faced the east, so that the worshipers could face the east in looking for the Messiah. So there's some really, really old rabbinic traditions concerning the coming of Messiah in his kingdom coming from the east. And when you think about the east, it also has some other connotations. Now, once again, this is not technically absolutely geographically correct in the sense of we think in GPS terms today, right? We've got our little GPS screens in our vehicles, and we say, okay, take me to the following location, and it says you are precisely 2.2 miles from there, and you get close, and it says in 300 feet, turn right, blah, blah, blah. Well, in ancient times, they didn't have that precision. That's why you find in some references it was about a day's journey, or it was this, or it was that, or the other. Well, guess what? Not only was Messiah expected to come from the east, not only did the sun rise from the east, and we might even go so far as to say, and I'll be really honest, I haven't found any rabbinic sources pointing this out per se, but the main source of the blessings of water in Israel was the Jordan, which was east of Jerusalem. Now, again, I don't have a given source that appeals to that eastwardness of Jordan, but I'm speculating there that may be it. But there's a negative thing as well, and that is that the enemies of God always came, and the byword, the symbolic word was they came from the north, and that's because they didn't want to come from and across the Arabian desert. That was so huge. So they would go up north if they were coming from Babylon, for instance, or if it was Assyria, for instance, or even when it was just Syria, they would go up north and then descend from there. However, what's really, really, really interesting is that in the Jewish War of 66 to 70, Vespasian came into Israel on the eastern side. And he crossed, just like Revelation 16 says, the kings of the earth came across the Euphrates. The river was dried up so that they could come across, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting that Revelation depicts the enemies who were going to destroy Jerusalem in the great day of the Lord, in the vindication of the martyrs. Guess where they were coming from? They were going to come from the east. They were going to cross the Euphrates. Peter Leithart, in his commentary on the book of Revelation, makes a really, really good point on this, and it's certainly one that I had never really thought about before, but he traces the pathway of Vespasian as he invaded the land, and he did not come the normal route, just simply coming from the north. I mean, after all, if you were just simply coming from Rome, you would go north, then you would go west from Jerusalem. But if you're invading strictly from Rome, then you would travel east and then you'd go south. But Vespasian gathered his forces and he crossed the Euphrates from the east into the land of Israel, crossing Jordan and decimating the country as he went. So there are all sorts of little nuances that can be associated with this concept of the East. And by the way, let's not forget that in Ezekiel chapter 8, the pagan idolaters stood in the doorway of the temple which faced east, and they worshiped their god or their goddesses of Tammuz and the Ashtaroth and what have you. And you know, William, I think you probably agree with me. I've never really quite understood how or why the motivation for the worshiping of Tammuz, because part of the worship of Tammuz was, and all you got to do is read Ezekiel chapter 8 on this, and you'll see it. They ate mice. They worshipped mice. Say what? I mean, kind of makes you wonder how the women got along with that cult, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
If they had the same aversion to mice back then that women do today, because I can guarantee you, if a mice were to run across our floor and Jan would see it, she would be hanging from the light fixtures. She does not do mice well at all, not at all. So anyway, the worshipers of Tammuz and the pantheon of Baal and Ashtaroth, they stood in the eastern door of the temple, and they perverted the worship of the Lord. They looked into the temple from the east as they stood at the doorway. I think I've got this right. And they looked into the temple as they perverted the worship. But in the worship of Ezekiel, he looked outward from the door of the temple and went east. And I think that's the correct geographical references. So anyway, that's just a little bit of the background nuances and the flavor of the emphasis on the east that is given, some positive, some negative, in the scriptures. And clearly the river of life that is flowing out in Ezekiel 47 is a very, very positive thing. Now, there's something really, really interesting about this. In verse 8, well, let's just read again. He said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region, goes down into the valley, and enters the sea. When it reaches the sea, its waters are healed. And it shall be that every living thing that moves wherever the rivers go will live. There will be a very great multitude of fish, pardon me, because these waters go there, for they will be healed, and everything will live wherever the rivers go. However, verse 11, its swamps and marshes will not be healed. They will be given over to salt. William, what do you think? Have you given any thought to the significance of this?
And once again, I haven't looked at the text to really just ponder and research, what might be meant here. Just from a practical point of view, at least, just looking at it, usually when you have things that are, of the negative connotation here, it would refer either to those who are the enemies of God, et cetera, those who are rejecting the grace, et cetera, that God has, that God is, giving them. And so I would think that there's some allusion perhaps to that.
Well, you may not have given a lot of thought to it, but I think you nailed it pretty well, because I think that is precisely what it's saying. I think that it is saying and communicating the fact that this river brings an abundance of grace. It brings an abundance of blessing. It brings a tremendous riches and life. Most of all, it brings life. However, it doesn't bring life to everything. And, I mean, after all, that's the significance of that little closing phrase when it says, they, that is swamps and marshes, they will be given over to salt. Well, what happens when you put salt on ground, William?
Well, it kills everything.
That's for sure. Yeah. I mean, you spread salt. And by the way, folks, this is one more of those really, really, really fascinating historical realities that happened in the ancient world. And it's ironic, once again. Number one, salt was extremely, extremely valuable in the ancient days. As a matter of fact, we get our word salary from that product. Roman soldiers were not always paid in coin. They were paid in salt, because that's how valuable salt was. So salt was a commodity. Salt was viewed as a preservative. You are the salt of the earth. So there's this absolutely beautiful, marvelous, wonderful aspect of salt. There's also the negative side of it. There are records from the ancient world in which armies would invade their enemies. And to make things as hard as they could on their enemies, to ensure that they stayed subjugated to them, guess what they would do? They would salt their farmland. They would spread salt everywhere to prevent the growing of crops. Now, I want to tell you, in the ancient world, which was primarily agriculture, dependent upon agriculture, just to live, just to feed yourself, for your enemy to invade your land and to salt your land, that meant one of two things. You're either going to starve to death, or you're going to be completely, totally dependent upon them for your food and sustenance. So if you're going to be completely, totally dependent upon your enemy for grain, just to feed your family and to stay alive, are you going to cause much trouble? Probably not. Probably not. And so, again, salt had both a positive use, a flavoring preserving use, a wonderful use, but it also had a destructive, negative use, because that which had been salted when it came to productivity, it ceased to produce. And so it seems to me, William, give me your thoughts on this, and I think you've already discussed it ever so briefly, but we have the doctrine of what's known as universalism, and that says every single person that has ever lived, no matter how much of a reprobate, no matter how immoral, no matter how profligate, no matter how dishonest, no matter how cruel, they may be punished for a little while, but the purpose of that punishment will be not retributive, but rather corrective. In other words, it will be for the purpose of making them see the error of their way, and they will repent, and when they repent, they're actually saved. It seems to me that Ezekiel 47 is a pretty powerful refutation of that, because you have the river of life that is intended for life, but there are some areas that it just flat does not give life to, because those areas have no life in them. Do you think that's a fair assessment of that passage?
I think that's very good as an interpretation of the text. So, it makes sense. And as you say, it addresses that idea of, the retribution in terms of just some type of corrective punishment. So I think it's very good.
Well, we're coming down. Well, no, we got just a few moments left. Verse 10. It shall be the fishermen will stand by it from En-Gedi to En-Eglaim. They will be places for spreading their nets. Their fish will be of the same kinds as the fish of the great sea, exceedingly many. Now, keep in mind, folks, once again, we're talking about the Dead Sea. Now, I've never been there, all right? I've talked to people who have been there. I've seen the pictures of the people who go there. Now, by the way, the Dead Sea has been losing water over the last few years at an alarming rate, according to a lot of the articles that I have read. But nonetheless, the Dead Sea is literally that. It is not a place that you're going to go bass fishing. It's not a place you're going to go to throw your nets out and catch fish. It's called the Dead Sea for a reason. It has an incredibly high, guess what, salt content. And so this is the power of the river of life, okay? We have kind of a paradox here. On the one hand, the river of life flows into the Dead Sea, which has an extremely high salt content, but it counteracts that, and it brings life. And it produces fish and life and blessings. On the other hand of that, in the areas of the marshes and the swamps, it cannot even bring life to that same area. So there's a little bit of a paradox here. Some would call that a contradiction, but it's not. It's just imagery. Pardon me. And it, part of the prophetic corpus, part of the prophetic nature of language, Hebraic language, sometimes when you start pressing the literalism of the text, then you absolutely invariably get in trouble. And by the way, I mentioned this article by Sam Frost a little bit ago. And what I just touched on there, folks, is the issue of hermeneutic. William and I have talked about this a tremendous number of times, and it's always good to be able to point out the hermeneutical fallacies of the opponents of covenant eschatology. In Sam Frost's article, Sam says, quote, I wrote, that is in his book, Essays on the Resurrection,
Dunn, are you there? Okay, looks like something has occurred, and maybe we lost Dunn. Yep, we absolutely lost him, and I apologize for that, but it happens with technology from time to time. He was about to make some comments regarding Sam Frost's book, and but nevertheless, maybe he will get back in the last few minutes, and if he doesn't, of course, he's just been summing up and talking about the flow of this river of life that is found in Ezekiel chapter 47 and how it affects the Dead Sea in terms of the imagery that's listed there. And, of course, from Bible geography days, you learn about the topography of Israel and, the geographic layout of the land. And, of course, the Dead Sea was in the very south and was the sea, as Dunn was saying, where nothing grew, there was no life, etc. And yet with the river of life that Ezekiel describes, it flows into the Dead Sea and causes things to live. And that shows the power of it. It shows the abundance of the river of life, because it compares the blessings of it to the fish in the Mediterranean Sea. And the vastness of, fish. And, of course, even when God talked about Israel, he said that they multiplied like fishes, and thus how rapidly and how quickly life spread as a result. And so the idea of abundance, the idea of blessing with the river of life found in Ezekiel chapter 47. And yet, at the same time, as Dunn was pointing out, in verse 11, it says, its swamps and marshes will not be healed, and they will be given over to salt. I thought his explanation on salt was very, very powerful and appropriate because he talked about the fact that it was for preservation, and it was for savoring foods and meat, etc. But at the same time, it had a destroying element to it, where wherever you placed it, it would cause things to die. And so Jesus made the statement in Matthew when he talked about the saints being the salt of the earth. And he says, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? And so all of those ideas that were expressed in that, and you have them spoken of in this context to demonstrate how the river of life affects life for those who are receptive to it, who are willing to receive grace, as opposed to those who, in spite of all that the Lord has done, will reject it and thereby cause themselves not to be blessed by it. So that will wrap up the message for tonight. We do want to encourage you to tune in every Tuesday from 6 until 7 p.m. Central Time, 7 to 8 Eastern Time, for the Two Guys and a Bible broadcast. And listen to the continuation of these studies on Ezekiel 47 and the closing chapters of the book as they express the fulfillment of prophecy and the will of God. Definitely challenging, but also very interesting and also very rewarding and a blessing. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Dr. Dunn Preston and myself, we want to say to you, thank you once again for listening. Always a pleasure to be here with Dunn, to listen to his insights, the depth of his study, and the breadth of that study as well, as you can easily see as you listen to the message that he brings. But until next week, may God bless you all. Have a good night. God bless, and we will see you on the other side.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.